Hello and welcome to our webinar, this time on supporting the non-specialist teacher. My name is Al and I am the Secondary Science Curriculum Advisor at LBQ. But more importantly, I think for this webinar, I was a non-specialist teacher. My degree was in biology, and by the time I finished my teaching career 20 years later, I was teaching A-level physics. It was quite the convoluted route. So what I want to do today is show you and share with you some tips that helped me when I first started teaching outside my specialism, and tips that also I then went on to use when I was head of department to support members of staff that I was working with. And I also want to show you our platform, Learning by Questions, and explain how it can allow these tips to be implemented with pretty much minimum workload, which I think we all appreciate. But before we jump into that, let's have a little bit of data. In September 2025, the Institute of Physics dropped this data. They told us that 58% of physics GCSE students are taught by a non-specialist, which is obviously a lot, and 25% of state schools have no specialist physics teacher at all. The data did seem to indicate, perhaps unsurprisingly, that schools in the higher socio-economic status areas were kind of having first dibs on the specialist teachers. And that may or may not have contributed to the last bullet point on this slide, which is 70% of A-level physics students actually come from just 30% of schools, those schools mainly in those higher socioeconomic areas. Now, are specialist teachers always problematic? I want to start with this because we're all teachers and we all have a wide range of transferable skills, and a good teacher is a good teacher, regardless of whether they're a specialist or not. They will have challenges as a non-specialist teacher, but that does not mean that they are not a good teacher. As head of department, I would quite often take particular strong members of staff and place them on classes where they were teaching outside of their specialism for perhaps behavior management reasons or other reasons, that they could build good relationships with these students. And for me, it was always the best, when I did that, it was the best choice I could have made at the time. So absolutely, a good teacher is a good teacher, regardless of whether you're a specialist or not within science, in my opinion. However, even if you are a non-specialist who's a great teacher, you're still going to have the same problem that all non-specialists will have, which is subject knowledge gaps initially, familiarity with exam rubric, familiarity with misconceptions. All of those will develop as time goes on, but they are absolutely going to be there in the first instance. And this last one I've put in red here, awareness of appropriate scientific demonstrations and practicals. The reason that's in red is because if you take nothing away from what I'm going to tell you for the rest of this webinar, I want you to take this away. This will help you and your students and any non-specialist teacher in the department when it comes to communicating the important information for the required practicals to your students. There will be, in the description of this video, I am sure, instructions on how to access this PDF. When you download it, you can simply print it off and give it to your students, and you'll see that there are a whole host of required practicals. We have all 28, and each one has 4 kind of QR codes next to it. And if we look at them a little bit more closely, we can see that when your students click on this one, for example, they will then be taken to a question set, which will help them with their planning, how those required practicals should be planned for, what are the variables, etc. This one will take them to a set of results and questions that will help them learn how to analyze effectively the results. And then we have these question sets on associated content at foundation and higher. Really, really powerful, really, really useful. You don't need a subscription. You can simply just download that, walk away, even if nothing else I say is of any use to you. Anyway, we spoke about these challenges, but really, like I said, they are all overcomable if we have this. The main challenge is time. If we had all the time in the world, we would have coaching going on every single week. We'd have those ideal mentor-mentee relationships. We'd have staff going out on CPD courses. We would, we'd be in a far better position if, as teachers, we had our hands on just a little bit more time. But we don't in many circumstances. So what can we do to try and buy ourselves some time? Well, something I'm sure a lot of you have already thought of, and a lot of you already do, is this kind of doubling up of classes. This worked really, really well for me in the past. If we imagine that teacher one here is the non-specialist teacher and teacher two is a specialist, well, if we're lucky enough to have two GCSE classes timetabled at the same time, then we can use the specialist and the non-specialist teacher to kind of joint teach those classes as the year goes on. And we can see in the first term and a half, teacher one, the non-specialist, his status areas were kind of having first dibs on the specialist teachers. And that may or may not have contributed to the last bullet point on this slide, which is 70% of A-level physics students actually come from just 30% of schools, those schools mainly in those higher socioeconomic areas. Now, are specialist teachers always problematic? I want to start with this because we're all teachers and we all have a wide range of transferable skills, and a good teacher is a good teacher, regardless of whether they're a specialist or not. They will have challenges as a non-specialist teacher, but that does not mean that they are not a good teacher. As head of department, I would quite often take particular strong members of staff and place them on classes where they were teaching outside of their specialism for perhaps behavior management reasons or other reasons, that they could build good relationships with these students. And for me, it was always the best, when I did that, it was the best choice I could have made at the time. So absolutely, a good teacher is a good teacher, regardless of whether you're a specialist or not within science, in my opinion. However, even if you are a non-specialist who's a great teacher, you're still going to have the same problem that all non-specialists will have, which is subject knowledge gaps initially, familiarity with exam rubric, familiarity with misconceptions. All of those will develop as time goes on, but they are absolutely going to be there in the first instance. And this last one I've put in red here, awareness of appropriate scientific demonstrations and practicals. The reason that's in red is because if you take nothing away from what I'm going to tell you for the rest of this webinar, I want you to take this away. This will help you and your students and any non-specialist teacher in the department when it comes to communicating the important information for the required practicals to your students. There will be, in the description of this video, I am sure, instructions on how to access this PDF. When you download it, you can simply print it off and give it to your students, and you'll see that there are a whole host of required practicals. We have all 28, and each one has 4 kind of QR codes next to it. And if we look at them a little bit more closely, we can see that when your students click on this one, for example, they will then be taken to a question set, which will help them with their planning, how those required practicals should be planned for, what are the variables, etc. This one will take them to a set of results and questions that will help them learn how to analyze effectively the results. And then we have these question sets on associated content at foundation and higher. Really, really powerful, really, really useful. You don't need a subscription. You can simply just download that, walk away, even if nothing else I say is of any use to you. Anyway, we spoke about these challenges, but really, like I said, they are all overcomable if we have this. The main challenge is time. If we had all the time in the world, we would have coaching going on every single week. We'd have those ideal mentor-mentee relationships. We'd have staff going out on CPD courses. We would, we'd be in a far better position if, as teachers, we had our hands on just a little bit more time. But we don't in many circumstances. So what can we do to try and buy ourselves some time? Well, something I'm sure a lot of you have already thought of, and a lot of you already do, is this kind of doubling up of classes. This worked really, really well for me in the past. If we imagine that teacher one here is the non-specialist teacher and teacher two is a specialist, well, if we're lucky enough to have 2 GCSE classes timetabled at the same time, then we can use the specialist and the non-specialist teacher to kind of joint teach those classes as the year goes on. And we can see in the first term and a half, teacher one, the non-specialist, is only having to deliver the first half of the course, and then again, they're delivering it in the second half of the course, albeit with a different class. But that buys them a little bit of time to get familiar with, again, the misconceptions, the subject knowledge, the exam rubric for just that first half of the course. Which obviously, is going to ease the stress quite a lot. I understand there will be issues with accountability in a lot of schools for this. How do we judge against our targets? Which teacher has, um, is more responsible for the success or failure of each class? I understand those hurdles exist. Um, I wish they didn't, but that is obviously something you'll have to work out in your own schools. Obviously, if you have a department where you have lots of non-specialist teachers, it can get quite complicated and is probably not going to work out. But if you can, even just in one instance, I have found that really, really, really useful in the past. Okay. Something else I think is great for getting the voice of a specialist teacher into the classroom of a non-specialist teacher. Simple starter activities. So I'll give you an example. We could get and I'm using physics as an example, but obviously this could be any subject. We can get the specialist physics teacher to write, as the year goes on, a set of starter activities that are written, to a high level using that specialist language, that specialist vocabulary. We've got a few questions here, and if we look at question 3, perhaps this type of question wouldn't occur to a specialist. A 50-kilogram box is falling from a height of 10 meters. I put this bit in bold. Use the law of conservation of energy to show that the box will strike the floor at 14 meters per second. If you're doing perhaps Edexcel and you're a non-specialist teacher, I don't know what's happened with my PowerPoint there. Apologies, it's all gone a little bit off key. But you might jump to this equation here, and you might think, well, that's how we're going to answer this question. But of course, the specialist kind of understands the depth and the nuance to that language. They understand that we're talking about using the law of conservation energy. And again, I don't know what's happened to the formatting on the PowerPoint, but the point is that the specialist teacher is able to design these starter activities and then place their own language, their own wording into the feedback onto the same set of slides, the answer slides, that the students in that non-specialist class can see. So we're getting the level of questions every single lesson as a starter activity. Now, if you've got a biology, chemistry, and a physics specialist in your department, then each one can take responsibility for this and build them up as time goes on until you've got an absolutely fantastic bank. And then it doesn't matter who's teaching what class, your starter activity is always going to be introducing the language and the thought process of a specialist teacher into the classroom. Now, as a bonus tip, one thing you could do is have the specialist teacher create a video that could be hyperlinked into this PowerPoint that the non-specialist could click on, where they actually verbally go through the question. Just something simple like this. It can be recorded under one of those USB cameras straight onto a whiteboard. This obviously looks like a maths question. The reason I've got this here is just to show you that I have actually used this. When I came out of full-time teaching, I did a little bit of intervention work before I come to learning by questions. And I worked with science and maths departments in school for about 2 years. And we use this idea of these specialist starters. And then we did embed these links that took us to a privated YouTube channel or an unlisted YouTube channel. That's what this little icon means here. It means all these videos are unlisted. And you can see my ugly mug there in my room at home. We would create these little videos that could be embedded into these PowerPoints, and then the non-specialists could simply click, assuming they have an interactive whiteboard, can simply click on that link and it will bring up the explanation in their own classroom. Now, you might think, well, these take a long time to do. Actually, videos like this, 2.5, 3 minutes, how long does it take to explain, how to answer a particular question? It doesn't take very long. And if you do have time, then to build these up over the course of the year, again, is very, very powerful. And it's good practice, full stop, really, outside of just helping specialist teachers. Another great way to get language and feedback from a specialist teacher in front of students who are being taught by a non-specialist is a simple marking share. So you might have, for example, a non-specialist teacher teaching a GCSE chemistry class, but when it comes to marking mock exam papers or a high-stakes assessment, well, can the non-specialist chemistry teacher perhaps instead mark somebody else's key stage 3 assessment and have those GCSE exam mocks be marked by a specialist in the department? And then the feedback that those students are receiving is coming from a specialist teacher. It wouldn't even perhaps have to be the entire GCSE papers that the specialist is marking. perhaps a non-specialist could mark just the 1 or 2 mark questions. And, those kind of like lengthier ones that require a little bit more understanding, a little bit more detailed feedback, they could be marked by a specialist teacher. It's a really nice, easy idea. Nobody's workload is increased if we come to some sort of arrangement about, fair swapping of work. And it works really well. And I quite like that one. Another example of something that can be quite effective for very little work is the creation of an explanation bank. When a specialist teacher is marking work, they could take just that little bit of extra time to thoroughly mark, for example, a 6 mark question, to thoroughly annotate it, and then to save that maybe as a screenshot that can be uploaded as some kind of digital image or PowerPoint that the student can then view in the classroom of a non-specialist teacher. What this allows the non-specialist to do is to bring up an example of students' work that has some really, really good critique from a specialist teacher all over it. This could be a bank of questions and images. It can be built up by all specialist teachers in the department over the course of a year for the benefit of all members of staff. Now, we talked before about co-planning, and yes, sure, if we've got the time, if we can have a cover supervisor cover our registration periods once or twice a week to allow a specialist and a non-specialist teacher to get together, if we can allow uh, these two teachers perhaps to miss out on whole school weekly CPD sessions so they can get together and actually do something that's really going to bring on the non-specialist knowledge. Fantastic. But again, in a lot of schools, we don't have the time for that to happen. So wouldn't it be great if perhaps we had a fully resourced scheme of work that was highly flexible with perfectly pitched questions that included, worked examples and teacher feedback? That would be great. It takes an awful lot of work, but that is really where LBQ is going to come in, as it will here. A head of department, if you've got a non-specialist teacher in your department, you want to know what's going on in that classroom. You want your virtual eyes on those students so you know exactly what misconceptions they may be building through being taught by a non-specialist. How can you intervene if you don't know what's going on? But how can we get a picture of what's going on without an awful lot of data collection and an awful lot of marking, an awful lot of question level analysis that are put together? It's a huge ask and a huge amount of time. But we could do that. And I know a lot of you out there will be doing that. You'll be collecting huge amounts of question level analysis to try and spot patterns and trends that then you can act on. But again, how can learning by questions help you with that? And just a quick note on medium and long-term supply staff in our department. We do know that obviously specialist teachers, certainly in physics, are going to be snapped up very, very quickly by a lot of schools. So if you're trying to cover a class like that with supply staff, chances are you're going to be recruiting a non-specialist teacher to do that. So not only are they going to face all the challenges we've already talked about, but they're going to face other challenges such as getting to know students as quickly as they possibly can. So is there a way learning by questions can help you or help your supply teacher almost gain an instant familiarity with how the students are performing in the classroom? Now, I said at the beginning of this webinar that learning by questions will be a great support or would help you support the non-specialists in your department. And it would also be a fantastic way to reduce workload by quite a large amount. I'm going to show you our platform now and hopefully try and get over some of the key ideas to you. I'll try only to be 5 or 6 minutes at this. So here we go. All of our question sets are written by specialist teachers. For example, this question set here on why is redshift evidence for the Big Bang Theory? Now, if we have a class, for example, here, a physics class being taught by a non-specialist teacher, this is super, super helpful because the way that the questions are scaffolded and guided really take those students through the topic in a way that a specialist teacher would. We start off here just building and scaffolding knowledge about how old is the universe, what is meant by the term Big Bang, etc. And it's not until we get maybe to the second level of questions where we start introducing concepts such as the Doppler effect, redshift, cosmological redshift. And as we get deeper into the question set, we start looking at emission spectra. And then eventually we start to tie it all together to try and show how this is evidence for the Big Bang Theory. Another thing I'm really proud of is the effort we go to providing quality feedback to our students. So, for example, we talked before about maybe a marking share where a specialist teacher could get feedback into the non-specialist classroom? Well, learning by questions will do that for you. An example we've got here is a simple kinetic energy calculation. Now, in a kinetic energy calculation, students might do various things wrong. They may forget to square the velocity, they may forget to halve the mass. And in this question, if you forget to do both, you'll arrive at the number 19 to two significant figures. And the feedback there is you forgot to halve the mass of the dog and to square the velocity of the dog. And if I show you actually the sort of back end of our question sets here, we have predicted all of these possible different misconceptions that students may answer depending on the combination of errors that we can predict they might make. Now, of course, if they don't make any of these specific errors, the feedback they get will still be useful, would still be helpful to them, and will still be written by a specialist teacher. While the students are answering the questions, a real-time question level analysis builds up in the background for the teacher to see in real time. So the non-specialist teacher or the supply teacher doesn't need to know which students in our class are students who ghost through topics or which students are ones that are reluctant to say when they need help, because they can see it here. For example, Denver Smith. Denver, obviously from the word go, is needing help from question one. So whatever your relationship is with those students, you can play, as a good teacher, you'll be placing yourself next to Denver at the point that they needed it most. We can also look vertically at individual questions that our entire class are struggling with. We can look at the responses for the entire class to see what misconceptions are out there. And then once we've understood those misconceptions, we can bring up the question and we can do a little bit of reteach. And once the reteach is done, Learning by Questions has an ad hoc question function, which will fire out a similar question to the students to assess if that intervention has actually, see if it's actually worked, if the students have actually understood it. So it's very, very powerful in that sort of identify a problem, provide intervention, test whether your intervention has worked kind of learning loop. You can do that with Learning by Questions really over and over and over for every single question in the set if you want to, not having to waste time in between with marking, etc. Now, when it comes to supporting the non-specialist teacher with a ready-made scheme of work that has this feedback, that has high-quality, well-pitched resources, we can use our schemes function. Out of the box, we have schemes for AQA and Edexcel, but I'm just going to click on the AQA separate science scheme here. Let's go combined science, actually. And I'm going to hit copy and modify. Out of the box, you can see that we have a scheme that the class will follow that is based on the specification. We've chunked up the specification and put our question sets that we think are most appropriate next to each topic. But you might think, well, this non-specialist teacher is teaching maybe a mid or low ability class, and I want to remove some of these question sets. It's very, very intuitive. You simply just hit the bin. You may want to search for some different question sets to replace them, in which case you just hit add question set and you do a very simple keyword search, if I can spell that correctly. And you can add a question set. Literally, you've just seen how long that's taken me, 10, 15 seconds. It's very, very intuitive. So you can build a scheme that you can then place a class on that is being taught by a non-specialist science teacher, and they're ready for them to go. The non-specialist can then just concentrate on getting familiar with the subject knowledge rather than having to worry about planning assessments, planning tasks, formative and summative tasks that can be done during the lesson. It's highly adaptable. We talked before about creating starter activities. Well, this can be done at the click of a button using our question collect function. So, for example, the specialist teacher maybe once a week might sit down just for 10 minutes and he might say right, I'm going to collect some questions that I find appropriate on maybe light and sound. And all I'm doing is I'm scrolling through the questions you can see on the right, and I'm clicking the question mark next to the questions I want to include. For whatever reason, I want to include them. And they all appear up here in our question collect. And when I press that button, I can now change the order. I can save them. And then from there, I can edit them if I want to. And I have a bespoke starter that has literally taken me a minute, 2 minutes to make. And again, these questions will have been written by specialist teachers and will have specialist feedback. We also have, finally, a very valuable diagnostic function. This makes homework meaningful. So a non-specialist teacher or any teacher can set homework, and when a diagnostic task has been done, the teacher or the head of department who wants to get eyes in that classroom can look at the analyze and action function, and they can see for all the students which questions they've got right, which questions they've got wrong. And our diagnostic question sets links each question to a particular point on the specification. So for example, question 10 in this set was linked to how atomic structure affects reactivity. And this task has been recommended by our system to be provided to Wasim based on what he got wrong. And you can simply hit set here, and then suddenly the homework you've done has become meaningful because an intervention task which fully fits the knowledge gap the student has been generated. The teacher can hit set all and do that with no workload whatsoever, or they can scroll through, and students who've got more than one question wrong, the teacher has control over exactly how many or how few question sets each student is given. We offer a 6-week trial, and any school that wants to come and have a look at it, we'll have a meeting with me and somebody else, and we'll teach you how to use it. You'll be supported over 6 weeks on how to get the best out of learning by questions for your students. And at the end of it, if you don't want it, absolutely fine. The trial is completely free. One thing I perhaps should have said in all of that is that all of the data for our question sets is stored permanently and can be accessed at any point by a head of department who wants to get an overview in the classroom. They can look at whole class data. They can look at individual student data just through the use of these two buttons here. So for example, individual student data can be accessed by looking at the pupil activity button. This is great for parents' evenings. You select your student, and this is only a demo account, so my student hasn't done a lot of tasks, but we can see them all here. And when you just have a little glance down this right-hand side, we make good use of these color keys. The wider the colored bar, the more work a student has done on that topic, and the darker green, the better the student has performed. We can click on it, and we can actually see, here's Misha, we can see what she's answered for every single question as well, and that is stored. We can really dig as deeply as we want into that data, so it's great for informing intervention classes. And finally, the very last thing I'm going to say, as a head of department, if you are trying to keep an eye on a class taught by a non-specialist teacher, we also provide things like most challenging questions. What are this class finding more difficult than any other class? So what are the students in this class finding more difficult than any other questions? And obviously intervention can be based on the back of that. Sorry, I waffled that bit a little bit for you, but there is learning by questions. Hopefully you've picked up something from this. The link or the directions to get the PDF for the required practical cookbook should be somewhere in the description. And like I say, if you are interested in taking another look at learning by questions, then our contact details will also be in the description, and I hope to speak to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.